Hello everybody, welcome to the Eternal Patch Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we are going to be looking at all of the cards out of Trials of Grodov, of which there are 20. And yeah, what current effect they've had on the meta, what kind of stuff we're sort of seeing as initial impressions with them have gone. We've played about 4 or 5 hours with these cards, and overall having a really good time with them. I would say that what is happening so far is that of the cards that I have seen designs for, I'd say there are a couple of different design goals that are particularly prevalent and seem to be in mind. So first off, there's a decent amount of Oni push to actually try and get Oni into the meta in a way that actually is meaningful tribal. There's a decent amount of shift and twist push to make sure that shift and twist cards are playable in ranked, as opposed to just completely unplayable. There's some pushed legendaries that are designed to basically shut down Rakano stuff and the big green Sodhi decks and totally shake up the meta, like Nash Desert Prince. And then there's like a couple of cards that are just there to sell sets, or like sort of, your Yisha the Equalizer, which is a big fancy green card that doesn't do a lot. But we have cards like Sodhi Wingbreaker that again are sort of organized towards that like Rakano shutdown. In addition, there's a couple of other archetypes that might be getting pushed here. We'll talk about them, but I would say that overall, like as far as those design goals go, if that's what's happening here, like just a total shakeup of the meta, an expansion of basically all of the interesting mechanics out of Dark Frontier, while a nerf and a pile of counters to a lot of the current prevalent meta decks. So far, from what I've seen, it's been a pretty good success. There's been an awful lot of Skycrag out there, specifically because of the release of Skycrag Insignia, and a lot of aggro stuff in general that has made it somewhat hard to divine exactly where the meta is going to land at. But I've also felt that overall, like, I would say that most of the stuff that we've tried has worked, and it's worked pretty well. So I'm feeling really good about this set. It's not full of extremely powerful cards, but it's full of extremely fun cards, and it's full of extremely fun cards that work with Dark Frontier in ways that you wouldn't expect, which means that new decks are available. The meta has not been this fun since I think even before Dark Frontier released, and like there's a ton of really interesting stuff happening out there. Like it is really fun to play Eternal right now. I've been very much enjoying the twist decks that we have been playing with, and we're going to talk about each of these cards individually, but overall this one's a success for me. So let's talk about the cards. Yeti Pioneer, 3-2 Reckless, War 2. When Yeti Pioneer attacks, you get +1 power this turn. I talked a little bit about this in our previous patch breakdown, or our previous spoiler breakdown, but yeah, this card is reasonably well statted for a little Reckless Yeti. There's tons of cool Yeti stuff out there, and the extra ramp means that you have a relevant red ramp card that's going to be pretty interesting to play. It's obviously very risky, high risk, high reward for potentially not the greatest benefits, but it seems like something that's going to be a little bit worth playing with, and like there should be some interesting decks with it. I don't think Yeti Pioneer's asking a lot. I think that there's plenty of stat points on it to sort of get you somewhere with it, and I think that ramp in red is fun, and it's really nice to see a 2-drop red ramp card. That card just does some really cool things. Ica Whirling Death. 4-cost, double red, berserk, double damage, ultimate, pay 8 to play a +5/+5 Deforge plate with endurance and overwhelm on Ica. So this is the splashy red rare. There's one in each color, and each of them is just kind of, I would say all of them are designed to be fulfilling different roles, but this one is designed to be like a really fun curve topper in Oni to sort of entice you towards Oni. Yeah, this card obviously doubles up double damage. Berserk and double damage together is such a fun set of skills together, and there's a reason it comes on a 1/1, because it's ridiculously powerful if you can do absolutely anything with this. In a Warcry Oni deck with just things like Elder's Feather and Warhelm, you can do ridiculous things with Ica. And if you want to reach for the stars with stuff like Inquisitor's Blade, more Deep Forge plates than you can possibly handle, withstand, all of the big ridiculous buffs that are going to like make Ica actually functional if Ica lives for a turn, then that's something that's certainly worth looking at. Like there's some pretty cool stuff happening there. Overall, I would say that Ica is fairly underpowered. It's not going to be a particularly strong card. It dies very quickly. The ultimate ability is really nice, which means that it is a fantastic top deck in top deck wars when both players are like completely out of stuff to play, but I would say that those situations are coming out around a lot less frequently lately, and it's very unlikely that this card is going to live long enough to actually see some value, particularly with some of the interesting twist focus strategies coming out and like a lot of interesting board Aura's Favor decks. Like, Ika's just a little bit hard to play around with. Nonetheless, synergizes well with Oni and Warcry, and it's such a fun curve topper that, you know, you just kind of want to play it, even if it's not going to be the most amazing thing in your list. I like this card. I think it's pretty good, and I think that Oni are pretty good in this set in particular, so it's not unreasonable to say that this card could see meta play. Hunter's Shot. Deal 4 damage to an enemy. Onslaught, create a Hellhound with charge and put it on top of your deck. I would say that the Onslaught for this card is mostly a drawback. You are only going to want to use that Onslaught in situations where basically you think that the Hellhound is going to win you the game. That being said, the disadvantage is not something that you ever have to play. You're almost never going to play Hunter's Shot after an attack unless you think that you can win the game with it. And if you can win the game with it, then A+. This is a 4-cost card that deals 4 damage. Dealing 4 damage is somewhat hard in mono fire, so that's pretty reasonable on the overhead. Like, this is something that actually kills some of the trickier units for fire to get rid of, like to cost the Harvester, or is it to cost Waystone Harvester? To cost Waystone Harvester. If it was just the Harvester, that would be a different card, I think. But yeah, like anything with 4 health that's kind of a little bit tricky to get over, Hunter's Shot gets rid of it. That actually allows for some interesting mono red strategies. I don't think this card is as bad as it looks. It's not amazingly stat efficient, but it is 4 damage to an enemy, which means it's fairly modular damage. It plays well with the spell damage Merchant, Howling Peak Smuggler, and like overall you get some really good benefits from it. Don't even look at the Onslaught. The Onslaught is there to win you the game if you think that you can win the game. Never play it for the Onslaught unless that Hellhound is absolutely what you need on the top of your deck. Forge Fire. Give one of your weapons +3/+3. Its wielder deals 3 damage to the enemy. I think we've talked about this card a little bit in spoiler breakdowns, and this is probably one of the weaker cards in the set. It's pretty good on weapons, and weapons are pretty important in the current setup. It's good with Oni. You can do some decent damage. It allows you to trigger infiltrates on units that you wouldn't otherwise be able to trigger infiltrates on. That being said, the card is expensive for its power points. The damage on it is decent, and the fact that it actually does allow you to play like deadly weapons, then like give the deadly weapons damage and do some interesting things there. Like, there's a lot of interesting jank that can be played with this, and a lot of really interesting small combos that are very fun to mess around with. Enough of those small combos and Forge Fire becomes something that's really relevant. On Relic weapons, it's particularly strong and gets you like another swing on basically Auric Runehammer. I would say this card is most pushed in an armory format where you actually want to have like a lot of removal, or you need to deal with a lot of small units at the same time. If you can actually get an Auric Runehammer to live for one more turn, then like this will allow it to live for another turn after that, while also just slaying a bunch of stuff that your opponent is trying to play into Runehammer. So fun stuff there. And if you're trying to just buff things up for Auric Reclaimer, Smuggler's Stash, any type of Reach Forge effect, Forge Fire has some really interesting stuff going on there. These decks haven't traditionally been very powerful, and I don't think this adds a lot of power points to those decks, but there's enough modularity here that it could see some play in an armory deck if you really wanted to. Cloak of Moments. Your units cost 1 less to shift. When one of your units emerges, it gets +1/+1. This card's really playable, fairly aggressive, very card inefficient, but very powerful with shift aggro, and that's kind of where it belongs. It gives everything that you play just a little bit more oomph, so it's very feast or famine. Basically, once you play Cloak of Moments, you're going to be playing like a 1-cost shift unit right after that. You can actually literally go Xenon Insignia, Cloak of Moments into a like 3 of the scouts. You can do some really interesting stuff with this that's very fast and aggressive, and then like basically just like, yeah, like I think the ideal hand here is 1 Xenon Insignia, 1 Cloak of Moments, 4 of those scouts that are 4 cost and give you scout, and then you just have, what is that, 16 points of damage, 4 scouts, and whatever else you want to do is like the world is your oyster. That's pretty interesting. There's some really cool stuff happening there. The kind of aggression that this card provides is really fantastic. I would say this card is not designed for other types of shift decks where you're trying to play shift for value, because there's just not a lot to be done with that kind of stuff. But there's enough 1-cost shift units and 2-cost shift units and interesting aggression to play that this card actually has its power. I've seen this card go off and it's pretty nuts. It's very difficult to get the actual balance right, but there's a shift aggro deck that plays this card and it's going to be really obnoxious. Borderlands Trail Cutter, 2/2 for 2. When one of your units becomes shift, it emerges 1 turn sooner, pay 5 to draw a card. If it has shift, you play that card and you shift it, so you get the shift trigger immediately. You can't really cheat a lot of things with shift with Borderlands Trail Cutter, but you can get a lot of card advantage out of the card, even if you aren't playing a lot of shift cards. I would say overall that's probably a reason to run this card, particularly in control decks that want to actually play multiple card draws, but also want to have 2-drops that can trade evenly with, you know, Champion of Fury, things like that. Things that actually have 2 attack on 2 are going to be pretty relevant right now, with Champion of Fury being, I guess, the preeminent 2-drop for a while. So anything like that is going to be something that you actually want in a control deck, and you're probably happy to play around with. I would say that this card is not unreasonable. It is still a little bit on the weak side for like overall stats for value, but the fact that it's an infinite draw engine and also gives you some interesting bonuses to shift cards means that it could see play both in like a really dedicated Cloak of Moments deck where you're actually doing like just a ton of shift cards and you have an endgame plan, but also in like a more controlling shift deck with a lot less shift cards and a lot more like interesting plays to fiddle around with. I think that's kind of fun. Trail Cutter looks to me more like a control card than an aggro card. I don't think it synergizes well with Cloak of Moments, but it does provide you 2 different angles on shift, both of which are reasonably powerful and should give shift a boost up in the meta. Alright, Sabretooth Pride Leader, 3/5 ambush, summon, kill an enemy relic, or you gain 3 health. Yeah, this card's reasonable. 4 cost 3/5 is an interesting stat line, but it's overall enough stats that you can really sort of mess with Skycrag aggro, Rakano aggro, and even a little bit of Stonescar aggro, although this card notably does not stand up very well against Vara or Champion of Chaos, so if Stonescar aggro is the prevalent aggro, then Sabretooth Pride Leader becomes a lot worse. But I would say overall, this card's 3 health gain combined with its 5 health body means that it's a very likely tool to be using against those type of aggro decks, as well as to play in some interesting like lifesteal focused setups. Also, because it destroys Relic, that's going to be something that you can use a little bit modularly to mess with control decks, meaning that if you're playing a deck where you're trying to survive for long enough, you still have some toolkits to use against control decks that are very likely to have, you know, Annihilates for Sandstorm Titans and all your bigger stuff anyways. So yeah, it's hard to fit this in Sandstorm Titan slot, but I think it does belong in some decks, and the extra health gain off of it is pretty good for just setting up control. Basically, if you want to live to see turn 6, 7, or 8, Sabretooth Pride Leader is actually a really reasonable option to grab that sort of setup. If you don't really care that much about 6, 7, or 8, and you just want to play big cards and threaten your opponent, like you're not stalling, then Sabretooth Pride Leader is definitely not an efficient card, and you should be looking for other options to sort of set up your control. Nash Desert Prince. We've put this in the market already in a couple of decks that don't even really need it, and yeah, it's been a great market card. It not only shuts down all green-based Rakano stuff, like basically all of the flyers just get totally tossed. It doesn't hit Ikaria very well, but it hits almost everything else very well. It also plays well with anything that gives you deadly, anything that gives you extra bonuses on Xenon Obelisk, like that kind of stuff really gets you just a ton of value over time. I don't know, this card's really efficiently statted for a 6, and I'd say it's one of the more powerful legendaries in the cycle of 5 that we are getting this time around. So like, yeah, this card's great in the market, pretty dang good in the main if you're looking for like a pile of Aranas and the ability to just really mess up flyers. But I would say that overall, this is something that is specifically designed to make sure that Sodhi is not as much of a problem as it previously used to be, and it does that job admirably well. I had a very good time playing this card against Rakano Green, really enjoyed its overall effect, and it also allowed us to shut down some aggro cards and sort of just create a really like decent field of answers to Skycrag and the Oni weapon decks that are kind of happening right now. So I like this card a lot. It's very strong. It's mostly a market card, but every now and then you're going to be playing it in the main. Etched Armor. Summon, the wielder gets Aegis, 0/3. I'm not so sold on this one. It's an interesting twist enabler, but the summon wielder gets Aegis is pretty deceptive because A, you don't really want the Aegis to be on summon. You're more interested in it being on the weapon, since that means that in response to playing the Etched Armor, your opponent can't just kill your thing. But because it's a summon effect, you play Etched Armor on the thing, the summon effect triggers, and then your opponent has a chance to kill it in response, which is, yeah, not great. In addition, the power points on this card are not very strong. It's not really giving you a lot of extra benefits. You're most likely going to want Stand Together or Protect in this scenario, maybe even a weapon-based Aegis effect. So I think this card's a little bit underwhelming. It does help some Twist decks, but a lot of those Twist decks really don't want to be spending 3 power on turn 3 to just get a little bit of extra health. They're going to be more interested in using like Haunted Mask or Worn Shield to just get all of the power so that they can twist constantly and quickly. This doesn't really help, like, for example, Seraph all that much, because having a lot of extra health does not allow you to have extra power, which is where you really get the best benefits. This might belong in one of the decks with the new Legendary in green, but overall I found it pretty underwhelming. In the even in the show-off deck for this setup, it was one of the weakest cards in the deck. I think this is probably the biggest bomb of the set, or the biggest, not bomb. Bomb. What's the opposite of a bomb? The biggest opposite of a bomb in this set. Tribe Craftsman. Oni ally play a Justice Sigil from your deck depleted. Yeah! Green Onis, so good on that because it just allows you to play Rakano Oni a lot easier. This card is reasonably well statted, and the ramp that it gives you is very, very good. Like, overall, this card is the exact kind of bread and butter you're looking for if you want to play Oni weapons. It allows you to get to Deep Forge Plate that much faster. It allows you to play even cards like Egan's Sight. But yeah, like, I don't remember what the site's called. Egan's Armory? Oh man, I think it's Egan's Armory. But yeah, like, overall, like, this card is just like a really interesting way to ramp to 3 that isn't Icaria. Allows you to put some Rakano on the ground again, which, man, I miss Rakano on the ground. All that kind of Rakano mid-rangey stuff is really interesting and has a lot more fun interaction than Valkyrie Flyers. So I think pushing Oni is a really cool option, and this is a card that actually does push Oni somewhat. The Justice Sigil from your deck depleted is absolutely something that you want. The Oni ally is pretty easy to fulfill, so you're going to get that ramp pretty quickly, getting you to 5 that much faster, where you can do some interesting things and play around with some very powerful cards. I think this card opens up a lot of the Rakano mid-range that I always want to see more of and never see enough of. And like, overall, it's just a card advantage that you can easily get access to, ramp that you can easily get access to, and a stat line that's really not that bad. Yisha the Equalizer, 4-cost 5/5. Overall, this card's pretty underwhelming. Like, I know the joke is that it's like an overstated green 5-drop, but like, honestly, this card's understated for a 4-drop. A 5/5 is not gonna trade that well with anything. It kind of trades with Vara, at least, so you got some good stuff going on there because Vara is now a 5/6, but it doesn't have Deadly. It doesn't have like a lot of the things that you really want from a unit that basically has blank stats. So the thing that you really need to do here is get some benefit out of Yisha the Equalizer before you can actually use anything. And also remember that all of the Justice units tend to have pretty even health, so most of the time you have to play some decks, some cards that are specifically cheating, and move away from your other like pushed Justice legendaries to really get into the situations that you want to get into. The card does have pressure, and it does have enough stats that it's definitely a threat, but I don't think it's like the most powerful 4-drop in the format, and the fact that I think it's mostly just there to allow you to spar with Vara and also allow you to play some interesting shift decks or shift twist decks that can do some better things with like that kind of extra stats. The things that it's really good with are if you want to play it with the new Seraph Grand Tactician, if you want to play it with, of course, Momentum Builder, any type of Shard of the Spire type deck. As an extra Shard of the Spire, I like this card quite a lot. I think it's basically opening up green in some interesting areas. It's not adding a lot to other green decks, so as a result, I think I appreciate this card a lot more than I initially liked it at first glance. Like, it's something that definitely allows you to operate in different directions in Justice, but it doesn't add, I think, a lot of power points to any currently existing Justice deck that's just trying to play a lot of big flyers on you and really wants to start filling like the board on turn 5 while skipping turn 4 entirely to do basically an Icaria buff into all of their Valkyries. So yeah, because this card doesn't support Rakano Valks very well, and because it is kind of interesting and does some cool things with Twist, I'm overall on the side of this card, and I think it does have enough stat points to at least spar with other units and get you some really cool, potentially great Twist plays or Momentum Builder plays and Shard of the Spire plays, although I think that deck is still bad, even though you can now run 8 copies of Shard of the Spire in your deck, and that's a lot of fun. The fact that it does buff weapons is something to be noted. Like, that is actually really, really important because it means that you can do really expensive Steel Fang Chakrams, you can make etched armor a lot better. Basically anything where the weapon is a little bit unusual, you can do some really cool stuff with that, and that's something that Yisha has access to that other cards don't right now, so it's worth looking at if you want to build some decks around that idea. Overall, this is a pretty boring legendary, but there's some cool things that you can do with it, so not really displeased with it at least. Oni Combatant. Summon, give 2 of your other Oni wielding weapons +4/+4 while you have Oni Combatant. I've seen this card go off already. It's pretty fun. Yeah, like, people were ragging on this card, but I don't know. Oni weapons is kind of actually decently pushed at this point. There's a lot of ways to get weapons on Oni. There are like cards like Forge Master, Heavy Axe. You have Oni Weaponsmith, of course. I've seen a couple of decks that are just trying to do the, like, play a bunch of Heavy Axes, draw a bunch of cards setup, and they're a lot better situated than they ever been, but also I think there is an Oni weapons deck that just absolutely rolls people with Oni Combatant now, because turn 5 is pretty cheap for the amount of stats that this card is getting you, which is a total of +8/+8, and more likely a +4/+4 on a single unit that your opponent really cannot afford to deal with. Yeah, this card pushes Onis really well in a way that is very, very interesting. I'd say it's actually not that hard to get the weapons on the Oni. It's a very specific card, but the reward for that specificity is an amount of power on 5 that is just absolutely outrageous and feels like you are cheating in a very serious way. The deck is not good to the point of being like tier 1 good, but it is an aggressive aggro deck that you'll actually have to watch out for on the ladder, and I'd say that's something that Oni Combatant really provides in spades, so I'm pretty happy about it. Alright, Battlefield Instigator. Flying Onslaught, give another one of your units Berserk. I don't know about this card. Flowerhead. Also, like, riding a Cloud Snake that's like a little bit of a... kind of looks a little bit like a seal more than a serpent. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of interesting things going on with this art. So a 2/1 Flying Onslaught, give another one of your units Berserk is... there's a lot of things going on there. The stat line's just about there. The Berserk ability is really interesting, but not that valuable, especially since you both have to trigger Onslaught, which... not that hard, but also you get the Berserk on a unit that has just attacked and may already be dead. I think there may be too many hoops to jump through to actually get the value that Battlefield Instigator wants, but it's a small flyer, so I can see it being played in some like Huru flyer decks that really just want to push a lot of damage across very, very quickly. If you want to do like mono blue aggro, I think that Battlefield Instigator might be a really interesting choice for like a popper deck that wants to play just a lot of uncommons and common flyers and sort of mess people up. I don't know. I could see some play, but it's not looking like the most impressive uncommon in the world. Blood Hunt. Give one of your units Killer and Scout. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. You'll notice the art from Unexpected Arrival if you were ever in the game in the beta when Unexpected Arrival first got ditched. I love this art. I'm very glad it's come back, and Blood Hunt is definitely pretty interesting as far as all the things that are going on with it. So Killer in Blue, that's really good. It's Killer in Blue that doesn't require you to have triple blue, which I think is especially good, and blue really wants to have a lot of killer stuff, so this is something that I think is a really reasonable card. Overall, a Predator's Instinct with a Scout attached for 1 extra, not that bad a deal, and the fact that you can now play killer decks in Feln colors, in Skycrag colors, in basically any color that isn't time, and actually successfully pull that off with some really interesting cards. I'd say there's some cool like Huru killer decks that might even come out of this that could be pretty interesting. So this gives you access to a lot of interesting on-attack effects and sort of just general like skullduggery that you can really mess around with. It's pretty good on the 4/4 that draws cards, Jotun Feast color. There's a couple of interesting things that you can play around with here. Like you could even do like a Jek deck with the red Jek and sort of mess around with a bunch of other stuff. It's very good on Rost, or Roast, I think his name is. And yeah, like overall, I think it's a decent amount of interactivity in blue, and it's one of the most interesting blue removal cards that we have access to right now. So yeah, I'm pretty on board with this one. It's not an amazingly powerful card, but in the decks that it belongs to, you definitely want it. And like, I think the thing that it's most interesting in is Felm Dinosaurs, because Felm Dinosaurs has not really had a lot of things going on for it in a long while, and this is something that really provides some interesting access. Prey Finder, the card that allows you to capitalize on Blood Hunt. When one of your units makes a killer attack, draw a card. That value is very reasonable, and a 2/4 body is really, really sticky. So if you want to build a killer deck, this is the card to do it with. Like, you will be able to play Prey Finder. Prey Finder will usually live long enough for you to get at least one killer attack, and that means that you'll get a card's worth of advantage out of the killer effect. If your opponent's killing the Prey Finder instead of your killer card, at least that's happening, and you're going to get the value out of the killer card killing a unit without your Annihilate being spent to remove the killer card. So yeah, this is something that is good removal bait at 3 for all of the big stuff that you're going to be playing at 4 and 5, and if it doesn't get removed, you feel super happy about it. You're going to love that killer effect overall. I think this is a really strong effect, and yeah, pushes killer in a way that really allows you to access some cool new blue decks. Sodhi Wingbreaker. So Time got a really good card that punishes all that Saditi stuff. Now we have Primal getting exactly the same thing. At the end of your turn, if the enemy player took damage, draw a card. That's rough. Oh, you can play that and immediately draw a card, which replaces Sodhi Wingbreaker. That's pretty awesome. Onslaught deals 6 damage to an enemy unit with flying or an enemy site. So that means that you have an Onslaught option that actually kills sites, including cards like Dizo's Office, Regent's Tomb, a lot of the sites that are just generally problems. As well, you can also kill Makto Saditi, Ikaria, if you can pop the Aegis on it, which with snowballs and other things you can. You can mess up a lot of flyers with this and also get a bunch of card draw and damage out of it. I'd say that's really, really reasonable, and as long as you're playing a more aggressive, focused Primal deck, this is a great market card and occasionally a great card to have in the main, which could be pretty ridiculous. So yeah, good options there. It's a pretty powerful card. This is probably the strongest legendary in this expansion. Of the 6, I mean, Nash is pretty good too, but this is the one that has the most immediate onboard impact. So I think it's the one that's going to see the most play out of all of the different setups. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, Sodhi Wingbreaker seems like a great card to be playing out, and overall it does everything that you want a Primal card to do, which is mostly just a lot of damage to things that are really problematic for Primal. Primal got some great removal in this setup, and I think that that's going to be something that like really matters for getting you into better positions against other decks and really pushing Primal as a format. If you want to play Skycrag Control now, if you want to go back to Kenedins, if you want to basically play more in the Felm space or in a little bit of Skycrag, we talked about Skycrag as well, a little bit more Huru space. There's some interesting options here, and Sodhi is definitely something that really gives some benefits there. I kind of wish this card had flying, but being a Wingbreaker, I guess I can see it. But yeah, I think other than it not having flying, I love this card a lot, and overall it should do a lot of interesting things. Distilled Venom. Ooh, this is maybe the most powerful card in the set. Like, it's real good. We've been playing around with it quite a bit, and it is just surprisingly powerful for how poor it looks. Generally, 1-cost Curses have been very, very underwhelming, but I have found this card to push Twist in a way that is just absolutely ridiculous. Playing Lightning Sprite with this card, Belligerent Yeti, Takos Waystone Harvester, Seraph, Street Urchin, I've just basically found in every situation it tends to work as a very simple removal curse that is, well, it's a curse for first off, so you don't have to worry about counterspells or anything like that on your removal. It allows you to access basically a ton of extra card advantage, particularly on cards like Street Urchin or Seraph, and it also allows you to remove things very, very quickly with cards that would otherwise not be able to do a lot of good, like, for example, Belligerent Yeti or Lightning Sprite. You can basically just play down one of those cards, twist it a ton of times in a very short period of time, and then the unit that gets the -1 is just going to die very, very quickly. Other times you can put it on a big unit and you can just farm it for advantage, which it turns out there's a lot of advantage to be had with this. I have attacked with a 14/4 lightning sprite with this card. I have drawn 6 cards off of the wanted posters from Headhunter on turn like 2 or 3. Like there's turn 3 or 4, I would say. But like, yeah, this card has allowed you to get Tokasas that don't die to torches. It allows you to play Seraphs that can do multiple damage hits per turn. Like anytime that you're getting the kind of value that you want out of Distilled Venom, like you are absolutely super happy. And it's also a card that kills cards with 1 health without a lot of issue while giving you a free twist, and that's where the value most commonly lies. There are obviously some issues with this card. It's not strictly removal, and you shouldn't play it as such, or at least if you play it as such oh, whew, excuse me, dying. If you play it as such, you should not be playing it as your sole source of removal. But if you're going to be playing a twist-heavy deck, this is the card to put in there, because my goodness does it push twist in a way that is absolutely outrageous. Just basically any twist card, think about how this plays with Distilled Venom, and you'll generally find it to be pretty happy. Basically, as long as you can actually get the power to twist, as long as you can manage the sort of awkwardness of playing with this card, the amount of card advantage that it gets you, and the amount of like just sheer interaction that it gives you for playing a lot of twist cards in general, means that you can do some pretty ridiculous stuff. Oh yeah, I guess we're choking on the Distilled Venom. Yeah, that's the flavor for today's video. There you go. Debtor's Shackles. 3/2, when a unit goes to the enemy void, it gets voidbound, infiltrate, kill an enemy unit. Good to have a lot more of these like voidbound effects to shut down like void recursion. I don't know that anyone's going to play this card. It might be good, but it's a little bit hard to play around with. Mostly it goes pretty well in Feln Flyers, anything that you've got like a decent amount of like flying units or units that can easily infiltrate, then Debtor Shackles can be a pretty reasonable thing to throw on it. That being said, it's not strictly better than like Beast Color's Amulet or any of the other weapons that you already play for that type of infiltrate. It does give a couple of extra points of stats, but I don't know. It's pretty hard to play. Maybe in a weapon-focused deck you might be able to do something with it, but this one seems like one of the ones that's most likely to not see a lot of play. I'm curious, but usually I don't really want to see my Voidbound effect or like my Void shutdown on a weapon, especially when it's so specific in the way that it is currently set up. But at least you can Voidbind some units permanently and kill some things that are like really, really problematic to you permanently. This could be a market card. I am really uncertain. Frontier Surveyor, 3/3 flyer, summon your units with twist, get +1/+1. They may twist 1 time this turn for free. So Distilled Venom is the premier twist sort of setup, and I think you should be running like 4 of those in most of your twist decks. Frontier Surveyor is often more of a 2 or a 3, but occasionally a 5 if you are trying to get some very expensive twist effects out, or some very sort of resilient twist effects out. Things I have found this to be useful on so far include Tokas Waystone Harvester. The new Seraph obviously is the best target for Frontier Surveyor, because normally you would be just twisting on 5 anyways, so when you play it, you get the +1/+1 bonus on Seraph, you get to play the twist for free, which means you get a free unit, and that unit also has the advantage of being an additional 1/1 higher than it would be normally. So you'd get a 2-drop instead of a 1-drop on turn 5, or a 2-attack drop instead of a 1-attack drop on turn 5. That's pretty beneficial, and yeah, we've already leveraged this card for a sick amount of advantage in twist-based control decks. This card really enables twist-based control decks to take control of the game in a very serious way. It is not feast or famine. The flying body is very beneficial overall. You can, if you play it with even 1 twist unit, you're going to be pretty happy. So playing it on like turn 6 with a Headhunter is really not that bad on an empty board. You do have to have a lot of support to make this card work, but it definitely provides everything you need to be beneficial, and like overall I think this is another one of those cards that really pushes twist out into the meta. I would say that twist decks are perfectly viable now thanks to Frontier Surveyor and Distilled Venom, and like, yeah, this is a card that actually will see some play. Ultravail Ripper. So here's the big card advantage engine. Summon, play 3 units with shift from your void and shift them. Entomb, play 3 units with your shift from your void and shift them. I'm still not sure this card is any good, just because everything it does is delayed advantage. But if you're playing a really shift-focused deck, this card obviously wins you the game in pretty spectacular fashion. And as we've talked about with like that card from previously, the 1-cost Relic that basically messes up all of your shift cards and makes them shift a lot faster, there are a lot of different things that could potentially make this a card that just gets absolutely ridiculous over time. So yeah, this is a really, really big shift card for shift control decks that want to play just tons and tons of shift units. It's a really, really big shift card for shift aggro decks that want to play a bunch of these units, get them all killed very quickly, and then play them all again to do ridiculous nonsense. So, and it's also kind of interesting in mill-based shift decks where you're just trying to shut down a ton of different cards and play interesting void-based strategies with, like, say, Elf on the Shelf, where you just have like a ton of elves and you play sewer krakens and ridiculous nonsense. There's some interesting play with this. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting cheaty decks that it goes in. In none of them do I see it being the insanely powerful deciding card. Obviously, if you play this card and you have all of the different requirements fulfilled with it, you're much more likely to win the game. But at the same time, getting harsh ruled doesn't feel that bad here. You do get the shift units back immediately, which is interesting, so it at least allows you to stop that kind of setup. But yeah, like, there's some interesting things that have to happen for Ultravail Ripper to be amazing. Overall, the card advantage is definitely there, so this is a great curve topper for shift decks, and as long as shift decks are powerful, Ultravail Ripper will be the ultimate thing to slam down out of your market or in your main to just mess everyone up with everything that you've put out. But I'm not sure if the Ultravail Ripper deck is going to absolutely just roll everyone. It seems like tier 3 or tier 2. Could be good, could not, we'll see. I think it's definitely a very, very strong card. It's a very fancy card. It's a very flashy card. And it really makes me want to play some interesting shift decks. So in that, it's definitely mission accomplished. All right, that's it. We also have all of the Insignias. I kind of want to look at these real quick. We have the Rakano Insignia with the Cross Swords of Ikaria, the Skycrag Insignia with the Crown of Eilin, the Elysian Insignia with the, I'm guessing that's the Mark of the Explorers Guild? Yeah, it looks like just like an old man or something. I can't actually see it very well, which is a little unfortunate. Xenon Banner's got the gem of the Xenon. We still don't really know what that's all about. And then we got Archenport Insignia with Roland's fist on it, which is just a lovely little sort of side note about Roland, and kind of cute to see overall. Roland was definitely always pretty representative of Archenport. All of these are going to add a couple of interesting new decks to the setup. I think I'm glad that they attached them to the expansion overall. Like, from what I've seen, it's definitely shaken up the meta to put them in there. And, like, overall, I think it's important that people do get this particular expansion, because this expansion is going to be something that specifically makes everything in Eternal a lot more fun. So I want to see a lot of people playing this and spending their gold on it. Overall, I'm less enthused about like some of the other incentives, like the premium sigils. We've talked about that a little bit previously, but yeah, like, this was definitely worth the purchase, and like, for the gold, I think it's very good value if you want to play some interesting new and fun decks. And if you don't want to buy into this, that's okay. You're still going to play against a lot of new, interesting, and fun decks, and that's really what's important, shaking up the meta, making the game more fun. And I'd say that most likely this expansion has accomplished that goal. So pretty into it, very, very happy with the current setup. I actually like this expansion more than I think I've liked some of the previous expansions. I wasn't really too fond of Defiance overall, or Homecoming overall. But like, this is just like a pile of interesting fun cards. There's a lot more power in here than you would initially expect, and it comes from really, really weird places, which is very, very important. So for that reason, I'm very, very happy with what's happened with it, and yeah, I'm pleased with it. I was not expecting to be as pleased with it as I was. In fact, I was pretty critical of it when we were sort of looking at the cards initially, but overall, I'm just really, really enjoying myself with Eternal right now, and this has been a wild amount of fun. So that's my review of the current expansion. Hope you guys enjoyed. We will see you all next time. Feel free to like, subscribe. You can hit the notifications if you want to see all of my videos in your notifications. It's a little bell. That's everything. So thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely evening. Cheers.